My guest is Ed Dodge. Ed, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to talk about?
Great. Hey, Hart, it's great to be with you again. And it's always nice to be here with you and your audience. Tonight I'm going to talk about, I've worked together a presentation on what I call towards an ecological civilization. I've been working in clean energy now for like 15 years, and I've been a committed, deep green activist type for, more like 30 years. So I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and I've been working on it professionally for, like I said, 15 years. Um, I was at Cornell University for a long time. Both I got my undergraduate degree, and then I was an employee there on their first half of my career was IT. So I've always had a tech background. So I was employed at Cornell and on their research staff, like on the technical staff, where I built projects. I was an IT specialty IT guy, along the research side. And so I got my MBA at Cornell, and after I got my degree, I continued on staff, and it was involved in a number of clean energy research projects for I worked there for 8 years. It was involved in a number of high end clean energy research projects. So I was looking for, what really was going to work for a career change, what technologies were going to be best, and what I could, was looking for a career change to get out of computers. I got into writing. I got my hands on a lot of different stuff, and so I currently make my living building big solar projects all over the country. I'm in the trades. I work for a big construction company. We build large solar and battery storage projects and microgrids across the USA, megawatt scale projects. I do have a tech background, so I do know a thing or two about how this stuff works, and I've got some thoughts about how basically I'm very frustrated with the whole. As you'll see in my presentation, I've lost faith in the current approach to clean energy and 100% renewable energy, and we need a new way forward. So I've got a presentation here that we can get into. And Hart, if you got any questions before we start, or I'll just jump right in.
Let's just jump right in. I'll put
right.
you in presentation mode here. There we go.
All right, great. Yeah, this is perfect. So if you jump in, if you got any questions or any clarifications, feel free to interrupt. This is a presentation I've worked up from an article I wrote on my Substack. edwarddodge.substack.com. You can see the full article here with all the references. It's fully loaded with footnotes and references. So, towards an ecological civilization, spare me the BS. Let's solve the hardest energy problem first. We recently saw the fossil fuel victory at the COP28, at the recent COP28 negotiations. I assume the audience knows what that's about. It's the United Nations climate change negotiations. And at the end of it, the final resolution was a call to, quote unquote, transition away from fossil fuels without there being any firm commitments. People who were following these meetings know it was over. The fossil fuel companies were very well represented at these meetings. They were there, way outnumbered the climate change activists, and they were really running the show. It was in Dubai. It was hosted by the oil majors. And at the end of the day, the oil majors declared, they didn't say the words, they declared victory, but they all but did declare victory. They were smiling from ear to ear. The Saudis, the Emiratis, they were all happy with the results. And all the climate change activists were disgusted. They thought that it was, just another whitewash. But here's the question. Are the oil majors cynically lying, or do they have a better plan? I think the oil majors may have a better plan for the environment than they get credit for. First of all, they know they're not going out of business anytime soon because demand for their product extends as far into the future as anyone can project. And we can build out all the wind and solar, as we'll see. It does not undermine demand for their product, which means, and they're not going to run out either. Number two, they have proven technical capacities, proven technical options to eliminate the worst of the pollution, clean coal, synthetic fuels, as we're going to get into. They do have the capacity to, with modern technology, with 21st century technology, to take all the raw materials and scrub them down to non-toxic fuels, as we will see. And finally, I believe that net zero carbon emissions is completely possible. It's completely within our means if we close the loop on the carbon cycle through a combination of, one, industrial carbon capture upstream, as we're going to talk about, and two, ecological carbon capture downstream. That means restoring ecosystems and allowing nature and soil and everything you like to talk about on this channel with regenerative agriculture and ranching. That's going to be big in closing the loop, as we'll get into. And it's a multi-pronged thing. Industrial carbon capture and synthetic fuels upstream, ecological carbon capture downstream. We can close the loop on the carbon cycle. But today we're being told by the activists that we need to have 100% renewable energy. They say by 2030 or by 2050 we'll have 100% no carbon grid or no 100% clean energy. It's garbage. These plans, they don't work. Climate activists want 100% renewable energy and zero fossil fuels, but these plans do not solve for all of our engineering problems. They just don't. And renewables do not provide the quantity or quality of energy that civilization requires. And academic claims to the contrary are quite fraudulent. Mark Jacobson right there, I'm going to call him out, is a fraud. His work is fraudulent. With the Green New Deal was based on it. These claims that we can run the whole world on renewables don't add up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it.
Can you give a specific example of a claim that Mark Jacobson makes that you don't buy into?
His whole body of work is that 100% wind, water, and solar is all we need, with no combustion, no nuclear or anything, that we can run all of civilization, including transportation. And except if you look at his work and you ask him, how do you going to solve for transportation fuels? He waves it off with a wave of his hand. He simply says, we'll make hydrogen and that's what we're going to do. He literally devotes one page out of an entire book to like the world's transportation needs. It's absurd. It doesn't pass the laugh test. He got sued. He had all these lawsuits. I detail it in my, I don't want to spend time on it right now. I detail it in the article and in the footnotes. You can see all the bloody ugliness of it all. It's just another example of academic fraud that's ripe across our elite academia these days, which again, I don't want to get into right now, but
okay,
this stuff is a part of it.
Yeah.
The limitations of renewable energy are proven. Robert Bryce is an entire body of work detailing the engineering performance and the land use limitations. If you want to know, read his work. Simon Michaud, you've talked to him. He details the limitations of mineral resources. The demand for copper alone is in the next 30 years is as much copper as we've mined in all of human history. It's crazy, the mineral requirements. And then Derek Jensen details the ecological disaster that tearing up ecosystems to install wind turbines and solar panels is just doing more harm than good. I agree with all three of these people. Go check out their work. If you can, like I said in the article, if you can digest their work and still think this 100% renewable energy is good engineering and good ecology, then I don't know what else to say. Wind and solar are simply feeding growing energy demand. They are not replacing anything. This is the chart of energy growth over time. I don't want to spend. If you look at it closely, all the energy sources are just additive. Coal came first, and they added oil on top of coal, but coal didn't go away. Then they added natural gas on top of that, but the other two didn't go away. Wind and solar and hydro, they're all just being added on top. They're not replacing anything. It's a whole nother topic of discussion. But the point is, we're not replacing anything. It's just additive. Energy demand is simply growing. We need to plan for a high energy future, including nuclear power and everything. So I am a deep green environmentalist who has completely lost faith in our academic and political leadership. They're not looking at the climate change or renewable energy problem in the correct way. And we cannot ignore the hard energy problems and just hope they will solve themselves. This is a picture I took of a solar system. This is similar to the kind of things that my company builds, multi-megawatt ground mount systems. And this is one in upstate New York where it's, as you can see, all covered with snow and ice in the middle of winter, providing no heat, no power for a state that has banned drilling for natural gas and instead has, said we can get everything we need from wind and solar. Clearly, in the middle of the winter, you're not getting anything from solar. So the real problem environmentally, because I am an environmentalist and I do think we have some serious problems going on, it's the mass extinction event. That's what we should be worried about. Because if all the animals die out, we're next. But fortunately, the solution for the mass extinction event is the same solution for climate change. It's going to be to detoxify the environment and restore ecosystems at continental scales with urgency, as if our lives and civilization depend on it. But that's a whole nother. We're going to keep moving. So here's the heart of the conversation we want to talk about tonight. I asked in the title, let's solve the hardest energy problem first. So I'll ask you, well, you already know Hart because you've seen the presentation, but I'll ask the audience, what is the most difficult industry to decarbonize? Of all the different industries out there in the world, so is it cement? Is it maritime shipping? What's the most difficult to decarbonize? Well, it's going to be the one that consumes the most fossil fuels and B, has the most demanding technical requirements. So it's not maritime shipping. So because even though they consume huge amounts of fuel, their technical requirements are not that demanding. They can swap out any number of different fuels. And in fact, they use very low grade fuels today. So let's take a look. Let's find the hardest problem and solve that problem first, and see if the solution doesn't cascade down the rest of the way. So let's start at the top of the engineering pyramid and work our way down. So what's the most hardest one to solve? It's the United States Air Force. The U.S. military is the biggest consumer of petroleum on the planet. Over 50% of those distillate fuels go to the Air Force, and another over 30% go to the Navy. Because unlike maritime shipping that uses low-grade fuels, the Navy uses the equivalent of jet fuel, the Navy version of jet fuel for their ships. So, and this is going to be the hardest one to decarbonize because they have the most demanding requirements and they consume the greatest quantities. And there is no replacement, even theoretically, for jet engines and jet fuel on the battlefield. Battlefield performance demands the highest quality fuels, and all of the world's militaries use the same fuels for battlefield parity. So even though I'm going to be talking about the United States Air Force, this rule applies to all the world's air forces. The same for the Russian Air Force, same for the Chinese Air Force. They all came to the same solution because it's the best solution that's out there. Otherwise, they would all shift. Are you still with me? If there got any questions, just ask. So the military is the hardest one, but the next slide is really going to blow your mind because this blew my mind. They call it the military emissions gap. Carbon emissions of the militaries, all the world's militaries, not just the United States, all the world's militaries are not counted. They're not counted by the UN. They're not counted in any of these studies of climate emissions. They say it's a security risk. That's why they won't count them. But really what it is it's simply an admission that military carbon emissions are absolutely enormous and totally intractable because they're going to keep using jet engines. Sorry, like the military and the Air Force, whether you have one jet engine, whether you have an Air Force of one plane or an Air Force of 1,000 planes, it's still going to be using the highest, best engines that are out there. So, and there is no solution to replace liquid hydrocarbon fuels for these high performance applications. So, what works for the military is also a proxy for other heavy industries like mining and anything where you've got really massive machines that are doing the really biggest jobs. They're going to have the same kinds of solutions as the military. So this means that total decarbonization of our energy systems is not possible. There is no solution to 100% zero carbon because there is no replacing jet engines. There just isn't. And we need to acknowledge this. And if the fact that they don't even count military emissions, it means that like all these solutions and all these models that guys like Mark Jacobson are building about how much, we need to resolve, then they're not even counting these guys. And these are the biggest source of it all. So it just seems like an emperor wears no clothes moment where it's just so obvious that the whole academic models that are being approached on this are not looking at it the right way. They're not solving the hardest problem and they're just like kicking the can down the road. So, as it turns out, the Air Force actually has a plan for clean energy, and the Greens do not. Since there is no replacement for jet engines and jet fuel on the battlefield, deep rivers of supply must remain available. Right, so that's part of it. Is like the supply. You have to have massive supply all over the world at low cost or at reasonable cost. That means the infrastructure's got to remain in place. But as it turns out, when it comes to renewables, the United States Air Force is the biggest researcher and biggest purchaser of renewable fuels in the world. They have put more money and more effort into resolving this situation than anybody. But they're going to craft realistic solutions that actually meet their needs, and they're not going to be ideological. It has to meet battlefield performance. Otherwise, it doesn't work. They've tried every renewable fuel under the sun, algae, biomass, garbage. They've done them all. Most of the renewable fuels have failed. I detail the reasons in the article. Biomass doesn't scale and the fuels are low quality. Hydrogen's a joke. But what has worked is synthetic fuels like methanol, DME, and methanol to jet. These fuels are a big success. They meet Air Force quality standards, and that's going to be the path forward. Synthetic fuels are the future. Right here, we've got examples on the left is petroleum diesel in those jars. We've all seen it. It's yellow. It smells bad. It's full of sulfur. And then you see them on the right, they're burning. And when you burn it, it's full of black carbon smoke. You would never burn it indoors. You would never cook your food over diesel fuel. It's totally toxic. It's totally disgusting. It's the pollution is practically murderous. Especially to poor people that are stuck living near idling diesel engines and such. But synthetic fuels, when you see on the right, they don't have any sulfur in them, and they can be manufactured to be specific, and so they have no contaminants in them, and so kerosene is still toxic, but the methanol and DME they're non-toxic and they're safe for nature. You don't want to drink them, but they burn clean. So they're clean burning, high performance, low pollution, and the only ingredients that are required to make them are hydrogen and carbon. If any two, and hydrogen and carbon come in many forms, and so supplies are inexhaustible. We can manufacture synthetic fuels from now till forever. We'll never run out of raw materials. Peak oil is totally irrelevant. Syn fuels are made from many raw materials and recycled materials. So recycled carbon, captured carbon dioxide can be fed into these systems. This is a complicated model. I'm not going to go into it all, but waste plastics are an ideal feedstock. Biomass, sewage, garbage, they can all be thrown in the hopper. Low grades of coal and low grades of oil can all be upgraded into synthetic fuels. So we'll never run out of raw materials. Low grades of coal is what they started with making these fuels from back in World War II. So here's the paradox. The greenhouse gases that we're told to be scared of are actually green fuels as well. So methanol, I'm talking about three fuels here: methanol, DME, which is dimethyl ether, and kerosene. Methanol and DME are very simple fuels. Methanol is wood alcohol, the kind of alcohol you don't drink. Methanol is made from only two ingredients, the same two greenhouse gases that climate activists tell us to fear: carbon dioxide and methane. This is how they manufacture methanol.
So let me just ask, when these fuels are burned, what is the byproduct of that combustion?
On the pure fuels, it's going to be carbon dioxide and water vapor. And then if you're burning it with air, you'll get nitrogen oxide. So they are still hydrocarbon fuels. They have the same. People have been burning methanol forever. It's the same emissions. It's just you don't have the sulfur, and depending on how you're set up, you can reduce the particulate emissions to basically zero. And the particulate emissions are what kills people. Carbon dioxide is not toxic, folks. Carbon dioxide is not going to make you sick. Water vapor does not make you sick. Particulates make you sick. Any kind of sulfur dioxides, that makes you sick. That causes acid rain. And nitrogen oxides cause smog, and they cause some other stuff. And the nitrogen for the nitrogen oxides comes from the air. So when you have combustion with air, you're going to get nitrogen oxides. That's kind of, you can reduce them, but you can't eliminate them. And then with piston engines, any kind of piston engine that has lubricants in the pistons, you're going to get more pollutants from the piston engines themselves. They're always going to have a certain amount of pollution to them, and it comes from the lubricants. That's why a turbine is going to burn cleaner than a piston engine every time, because you don't have to have all these lubricants in there in the pistons. So methanol. Methanol has been used as a fuel traditionally for decades. They run race cars for a long time, still do, on methanol. Has about half the energy density of diesel. That's why they don't use it commercially, because it's got to have twice the fuel volume. But it's like totally safe for nature. If you spill it on the ground, spill it in the water, it doesn't cause any problems, doesn't leave any residues. And they manufacture it today at these massive volumes. It's a massive industrial commodity. The Methanex Corporation down in Louisiana makes it, so it's a reaction of, they take natural gas and react it with carbon dioxide, and it's an 80-20 ratio. And the process is like 99% efficient. The molecules zip together like a zipper. So there's basically no waste. Dimethyl ether is just a slight molecular twist. You make it the same way. I'm not going to dive into that process engineering, but either way, whether you make methanol or DME as your end product, it's like this, highly efficient process. And DME is like green propane. And in Asia, they use it a lot to blend with propane or LPG fuels. And we use it in America in our aerosol cans. It was what they came out with as the replacement for when they got rid of all the HFCs and the CFCs from the hairspray and from other aerosol cans. They started using DME as a non-toxic replacement in aerosols, and they use it today. So it's already on the market today. It's an existing commodity today. But the beauty of it is you can use DME in diesel engines, and you can run diesel engines at full power and full stroke with no loss of power and performance, and have none of the pollution, no particulates, no sulfur. It's like a miracle fuel. You just swap it over today, but since it's still carbon based, nobody wants to have it. Like, so we still just get stuck burning the same old diesel fuel, and we're still choking on all these fumes. But instead, we could be manufacturing DME today and replacing all the diesel. We sell diesel engines in my business. Like, we install diesel engines for microgrids. We would love to install DME. It would be fantastic. But there's a chicken and egg problem because they need to make DME engines. It's the same type of engine as a diesel engine, but it's a purpose built. But they're not going to make diesel engines if there's no demand, if there's no fuel supply. They're not going to, they're not going to supply the fuel if there's no engines on the market. So you get this chicken and egg thing, and everyone's busy talking about electric and no one's talking about it. It's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
So anyway, methanol and DME are these green fuels that they are probably going to use methanol in maritime shipping. It's the number one candidate to replace bunker fuels in maritime shipping. And we could use methanol in all of our boats, all of our outboard motors and consumer fuels today, and not be toxic to water.
It's important to replace bunker fuels because bunker fuels are extremely dirty and toxic.
They are the dirtiest and the most toxic because they buy the cheapest fuels that they can. The same thing with the cement factories. They buy the cheapest fuels that they can get their hands on and just throw it in the hopper. And so maritime, it's like, as long as it's like liquid, we'll burn it. Like, they don't care. Like, the nastiest fuels of all. So methanol would be a godsend if they shipped. And the only thing that they lose, because they don't lose engine performance, the engines run great on methanol. What they lose is volume on the fuel tanks. Your fuel tanks are going to be twice the size for the same distance. Or you have, 2/3 the size and 2/3 the distance. Some balancing act that way. Same thing if you're switching these fuels out for big rig trucking. But these compromises have already been sorted out. Like, these products are already on the market today.
One of the I'm not a big fan of electric vehicles to begin with, but thinking that we're going to have semi-tractor trailers with electric batteries is just ludicrous. There's not enough energy there. There's not enough energy density. They're going to have to build huge infrastructure to make it work. That infrastructure itself has a carbon footprint and an ecological footprint and that kind of thing.
No, my company builds that infrastructure. We're happy to talk to you about it. We build those charging stations. There's no way we're rolling out millions and millions of substation. It's every, I don't want to sidetrack the conversation. We can talk about that another time. But yeah, heavy duty electric vehicles, it makes no sense at all. I am on board with light duty electric, but not heavy duty. Heavy duty, I want green fuels. All right. So next chapter. Climate activists tell us to fear natural gas. This is a poster on the left there. It's Extinction Rebellion. They're campaigning in Washington, D.C., trying to, eliminate the natural gas freaking utility in Washington, D.C. It's a joke. So the climate activists are wrong. Methane is not a bridge. It's not a bridge fuel. It's the destination in our clean energy journey. Methane is wildly abundant in the universe. We'll never run out. It's non-toxic. It's safe for nature. It's energy rich. We have centuries of proven fossil supplies, and it's readily renewable. Mother Nature produces methane continuously, both biologically and geologically. She is incredibly generous. I want to talk to Nate Hagens and the other peak oil folks about this. We're not running out of natural gas, folks, and it's non-toxic. So if methane is bad...
apart from the ecological arguments, we have a system that is not ecological to begin with. So I was kind of looking forward to peak oil. I was looking forward to the decline of fossil fuels. But if what you're saying is true, then we're going to be able to make these fuels, whether they're good or not. But I think high energy is problematic. But it's good to know this. It's good to know that fossil fuels will be replaced whether we want them to or not, if your arguments are valid.
So if
I mean,
methane is bad,
I'm not saying fossil
no,
fuels.
no,
I'm
I
saying
like,
oil.
no, I hear you. It
I'm
all needs to
saying
be like,
diesel and gasoline will be replaced. You know, if these arguments are valid, diesel and gasoline will be replaced by something else. And my perspective is that it's not how clean the energy is; it's what we do with it. I
sure.
mean, the cleanness of the energy counts for something, but the main problem, I think, is what we do with it. So if we're
Well, I
allowed
mean,
to
ultimately,
continue all the
it's a
mischief,
moral
you
and
know,
ethical issue. If our morals and ethics as a culture are flawed, then it doesn't. All this rest of this stuff is downstream of that. And it doesn't really matter. Um, so, if methane is bad, then why is it a source of life on the ocean floor? They tell us to fear methane, but what's going on the ocean floor with the methane hydrates is pretty mind-boggling. So, there are vast methane hydrate ice deposits scattered across. They're not scattered. They're on the continental slopes of every continent around the world. These vast deposits, and they are sources of life. And it's an ice. They call it. It's ice that you can light on fire. It's methane frozen in ice, and it's compressed. And when they take it to the surface, you can light these blocks of ice on fire. Um, and it's the host of all this life. I'm going to show a little bit of this video if it works. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I'm not going to do that. The video's not working. The video works in my in the Substack. It's a really cool video. I've actually got a couple of videos that are of like on the seafloor of life of all these like sea anemones and crabs and tube worms that live on the methane. It's down deep in the ocean, below the sunlight. So it's the methane ice is the basis of the food chain. This methogenic bacteria feed off the methane, and then the bigger critters feed off those, and then the shrimp and all the stuff. It's the basis of the food chain. It's amazing. Oh, it started to work.
In high pressure, low temperature conditions, meaning it's stable here at the deep sea floor, where it forms mounds. During their 2017 expedition in the Gulf of Mexico, NOAA's remotely operated vehicle encountered these gas hydrate mounds at depths of around 1,050 meters. On the outcrops themselves, the only macrofauna identified as living directly on the methane hydrate was a species of polychaete called iceworms. At only 2 to 4 centimeters long, these worms burrow into the hydrate, creating small depressions, and survive by grazing on chemosynthetic bacteria that grow on the hydrate surface. Around the edges, streams of methane bubbles could be seen rising up towards the surface, sometimes encased in clear tubes of hydrate.
I don't want to spend too much time on the video, but I highly recommend you check it out. It's on my Substack. There's a couple other videos too. It's some remarkable footage.
Give us your Substack again.
edwarddodge.substack.com, and you'll find this article is the most recent one. So these methane hydrate reserves, they're absolutely massive. There's also methane hydrates at the surface. They're like in the permafrost that people are very concerned about, like from a climate change perspective, that could potentially, decompose and release a lot of methane. And, I'm not one to judge that. This stuff that I'm talking about is deep, 1,000 meters deep and more. They're not going to decompose and go to the surface. That there's so much methane everywhere. That's why I say it's wildly abundant. It's like it's at the surface, it's at the depths, it's everywhere. But I want you to look at this pyramid here, because this is a pyramid of the methane. It's also, this model also applies to oil and peak oil, because this is why the peak oilers get it wrong. Everybody's assuming that like oil is like one sort of grade of oil. When you slurp it up, then you empty the pool and it's all gone. But that's not really true. What happens is that it's like this pyramid shape of resource, where the stuff at the top is the highest lightest grade. That's your Beverly Hillbillies stuff that came up right at the surface, that was easy to get, that didn't require any effort, and that you could burn straight away. That stuff they ran out of that stuff a long time ago. And then they learned to dig a little bit deeper. And then they run out of that stuff and they learned to dig a little bit deeper. And every time you learn to dig a little bit deeper and unlock new sets of technology, unlocks a new step in the pyramid, you're unlocking a bigger resource. It's a lower grade resource, but it's a bigger resource. And ultimately, as the technology develops to a certain point that you can unlock these, more foundational grades, then the resources are so big, both with coal and with petroleum. The resources are so vast that running out becomes irrelevant. And the sort of energy return on energy invested becomes irrelevant, because you've got such a vast resource to start with that it's like, mining sand of the Sahara kind of thing. And this is what Daniel,
we're not
doing for years.
Generally speaking, in mining and in oil, the more time goes on and the more scarce the resource becomes, the more you have to tear up in order to get to it.
Sure. But petroleum and minerals are a little bit different in the sense that petroleum is the second most common liquid on the planet after water. And methane is just wildly everywhere. So, I mean, I don't have a solution for mining aside from space mining. That's we've talked about that other times, because I do think the mineral thing is a problem. But I think the carbon is so abundant that we can loop it and we can recycle it and we can play with it. So the methane hydrates, these ice hydrates, they are bigger than all the conventional coal, oil, and natural gas from all of history combined, and maybe orders of magnitude bigger. And they're not counted at all among proven reserves. They were only first mapped in the 1990s. Now, drillers had always known that they were there. They were always drilling through them, but they had no idea how extensive they were. The U.S. Geological Survey and Society, or USGS, they started mapping them in the 90s, and the researchers' minds were absolutely blown. In the Gulf of Mexico alone, it's like thousands of years, tens of thousands of TCF in the Gulf of Mexico alone, like trillion cubic feet in the Gulf of Mexico alone. They're spread around the world on every continent, so no one has a monopoly on them, although the United States does have the most just by virtue of having the longest coastlines. And then China, India, and Japan have already started harvesting them. They've already begun work. The Americans have done experimental work up in Alaska, but China, India, and Japan all have concerted commercial programs funded by the government to unlock these resources because they really need them. We just keep finding more natural gas. This is just a chart of natural gas reserves. Proven reserves are climbing year over year despite growing usage. Methane is the most successful renewable fuel. Unlike ethanol and biodiesel and any number of different bio-based fuels that have not really been successful. Corn ethanol is just a subsidy for corn farmers. It's not really an energy resource. Those fuels, renewable natural gas has been total success. It's identical to fossil methane, so they just pipe it right into the same pipelines. We get it out of our landfills, we get it out of our sewage treatment systems, we get it out of farm digesters, and with a little upgrade and a little cleanup, or they just use it right on site, you can pump it directly into the gas pipelines, and then they are using this renewable natural gas to fuel big rigs today. A lot of garbage trucks, Waste Management Systems, a big garbage hauling company. They are big on using RNG from their landfills in their garbage trucks. And it makes sense. Literally, the garbage trucks will refuel at the landfill on natural gas. It's pretty cool. So it totally works. It's totally successful. And it's by far the most successful renewable fuel on the market compared to any of the others. This is one of my favorite slides. The Nord Stream pipeline sabotage shows us in clear as day that natural gas is safe for nature. When those pipelines were busted open, we all watched the news reports as hundreds of pipe miles worth of natural gas gushed into the ocean for weeks. This was the biggest industrial methane spill in history by a wide margin. and yet there was no damage to fisheries or to coastlines. There was no dead fish, no dead birds, no people. There was no environmental payouts made. There was no complaints made. But if this had been an oil spill, if that had been an oil pipeline of that size, it would have been one of the worst eco-catastrophes ever. But natural gas wasn't a problem, and nobody complained, and nobody talks about it. But it's totally like, in fact, I think that was part of the calculus when they blew it up in the first place, because they knew it wouldn't be an ecological catastrophe. They wouldn't have dared blow it up if it was an oil pipeline, because the fallout would have been so catastrophic, and they never would have gotten away with it politically, But natural gas, they were more able to get away with it politically because it didn't wreck anybody's fisheries. So here's another video. LNG is cool. This is I'm not going to play this whole thing, but anyway, it's a demonstration video of all how safe LNG is. They pour it in a glass of water and drink the water, put a cigarette out in it. The fumes don't burn, or at least the fumes burn, but only like under certain conditions, but the liquid doesn't burn at all. They've got a goldfish bowl there. You can pour it in a goldfish bowl. It doesn't harm the fish because it doesn't go in the water. The LNG industry has by far the best safety record of every major industrial fuel or chemical, like by a wide margin. There hasn't been an LNG disaster. Touch wood, don't jinx anything here. Like really since World War II. All those LNG container ships, there hasn't been a disaster of any of them. Even when they have run aground, there hasn't, because it doesn't leave any toxic damage. The only threat is having them catch fire. But there's really, the safety record's outstanding. But you don't take my word for it. It's the insurance industry. They pay the lowest insurance rates. Stuff like that. The Shell Prelude, the FLNG. It's a triumph of engineering. To me, this is like a spaceship. This is FLNG is floating liquefied natural gas. This is the largest ship ever been built by man in the history of humanity, the largest ship ever been built. And what it is it's a floating LNG factory where they're doing the drilling for the natural gas, and they're harvesting it, and they're cleaning it up and converting it to LNG all on one big ship. And then they're offloading it into the big container ship. So that big container ship next door, that's docked up next to it, is a pretty massive ship. It looks small, but they're offloading cargo into that big container ship. And so it just shows that how we can move the entire industry offshore. Like, I'm not a fan of fracking. I don't want any more fracking in people's backyards. We can move this entire industry offshore, and just like, take it to the 21st century. We could replace petroleum with LNG and with synthetic fuels, and have resources that we can have for 1,000 years. And this stuff is great practice for going out to space. This is how we're going to cut our teeth and learn the skills we're going to need for space mining and stuff like that, is by doing deep maritime work. So I think this stuff is really impressive. Not everybody may agree with me, but I get impressed by this kind of stuff. Methane's in space. Saturn's moon Titan has an atmosphere of LNG. It has oceans and rain of liquefied methane. Like all these lakes that are mapped out, that's a map with all those are all lakes of LNG on Saturn's moon Titan. And on the right is a new rocket engine being developed by SpaceX. It's called the Raptor engine, and it's methane fueled. Methane's not a primary fuel they use for rockets, but it is one of the fuel options that they have. In space, methane is totally abundant, and they will absolutely be using it alongside water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and all the other like core biological gases that we need to recycle and utilize. This is next chapter. I was talking about managing systems upstream and managing them downstream. So ecological carbon capture does work. I've studied this. This is a picture of me on the left at a Department of Energy facility doing industrial carbon capture. The sequestration, it's usually paired with sequestration underground. Sequestration underground doesn't work. I don't like it. I never did. I was always looking for ways to utilize the carbon. On the right is some carbon dioxide plastics. I took a picture of that. CO2 can be used in small quantities in plastics, cement, beverages, and other stuff, but the numbers don't add up to like the scale we need for climate. The only thing that adds up to billions of tons, because we need to be able to deal with billions of tons on an annual basis, is synthetic fuels. You take that captured carbon dioxide, blend it with natural gas, and let me see if I can get this video to work. God damn. Blend it with natural gas, and you make methanol, DME. And so this video is really. Well, sorry about that. This I want to show this video. This is an animation by Shell of how they're going to make synthetic kerosene using their captured carbon dioxide. They're talking about with hydrogen here, but it's really going to be with natural gas. So you can watch that video. It's on my link. But Shell, the Air Force, they're all going in this direction. They're going to be making synthetic kerosene from captured carbon dioxide and using it in our airplanes, because there's frankly not that many options that work, but this does. I didn't make this stuff up. Oh, there it is. Now it wants to work. Synthetic kerosene, the future of aviation.
Flight transports us and the products we need, powered by kerosene, a fossil fuel. But can we fly and emit less? Shell accepted the challenge to make synthetic kerosene from green hydrogen and CO2. We created renewable solar and wind power and used an electrolyzer to create green hydrogen.
That part's all political.
CO2 from our furnace refinery and from the biogas plant of a Frisian dairy farmer. Back in the lab at Shell Technology Centre Amsterdam, we mixed the CO2 and the green hydrogen to create a gas mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Using Fischer-Tropsch technology, we converted this mixture into synthetic wax. We then used a special device to cut the wax into tiny molecules, which can be used as building blocks for liquid products like detergent, coolant, and synthetic kerosene. Planes are not yet allowed to fly on 100% synthetic kerosene. The maximum permitted is 50%. So we blended our synthetic kerosene with conventional kerosene. And then what? Then we took to the air for the very first flight on certified synthetic kerosene, made from CO2, water, and renewable energy. Experiment successful.
Yeah, so I'm not making this stuff up. I'm learning it from the Air Force. I'm learning it from Shell. This is what their plans are. So when I said in the first slide, do these guys have a plan? Are they just lying, or do they have a plan? I think they've got a plan. So this is the final chapter. This is stuff you can weigh in on, Hart, because this is where we close the loop on. So upstream, we're going to use industrial carbon capture to capture big point sources of CO2, blend that with natural gas and other renewable natural gas to make low carbon synthetic fuels that are high quality. And then we're going to close the loop by harnessing the Earth's carbon cycle and rebuilding the soil that we've been destroying for the last couple hundred years, and restore our ecosystems that we've been ravaging, because that's how we take the carbon and do what nature wants to do with it. Carbon dioxide and methane are not bad. They're building blocks of life. And if we restore the life, we can restore. She'll take billions of tons of carbon easy. If we shift, they can't be small projects, so it has to be like at a continental scale. We have to figure out deep-seated incentives that everybody's incentivized to deepen the roots of the. Can you go back to the slide here?
Yeah. Oops. Let me see. Let's just do this.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so this is slide's probably the number's a little small, but the point is you can see it in my Substack. The Earth's carbon cycle is much bigger than human carbon emissions. We're doing up to 10 tons of carbon a year, or 10 gigatons, I should say, 10 billion tons of carbon a year, while the Earth is doing hundreds of billions of tons a year. And if we work with nature instead of destroying nature, this has been half the battle all along, that half the problem with why our rising carbon emissions is because we're destroying nature, and the soil itself is decomposing into CO2, but the soil is losing its capacity to pull the carbon dioxide down. So too much is going in the ocean, not enough is going back into the soil, back into the forest, back into the wildlife. The wildlife itself is made from carbon. So if we can figure that out as a culture, that's actually a solvable problem. So the potential for ecological carbon capture is absolutely massive. Every square inch of land is available for restoration and renewal, and Mother Nature will readily absorb billions of tons of carbon every year. Deep-rooted grasslands sequester carbon deep in the soil. So these are different. This is an image of different types of grasses, and how deep their root systems go, how many feet down into that, and all of that represents soil, and all of that soil is made from carbon. And then down inside there, you get the networks of mycorrhizal fungi that are transporting nutrients and water and carbon in a vast cooperative system underground. And it's like this rich, teeming with life underground. And we've been ruining it. We've been destroying it because we're not aware, because we're dumb, But we can fix that. That is a solvable problem.
Right.
Art, like work folks like you're doing and in your circle of friends are getting the word out. And this is something we don't have to be hopeless about. This is something we can all do, that we can all have at least our own little bit. We don't have to feel helpless about it. I feel very encouraged in this regard.
Right.
Peatlands, wetlands, and forests all offer deep and thirsty carbon sinks. Restoring contiguous ecosystems will help wildlife survive and also sequester billions of tons of carbon every year. The mass extinction event and the climate change CO2 problem, the solution is the same. Restore the ecosystems and restore the places for life to thrive and detoxify. We got to stop the toxic pollution and restore the ecosystems. A circular economy has no waste or pollution. Nature provides the model for endless growth through circularity and a recognition of ecological limits. Our current enlightenment-based capitalist modality is all linear. We go extract resources, use them once, dump the effluent, go back and do it again. And we don't think in circular terms. And then we're shocked that we're running out of resources over here and piled up with pollution over there. Well, it's like, hey, people, nature doesn't do it that way. You want endless growth in your markets demand endless growth. Well, nature shows us how. The jungle, the forest has endless growth for thousands and thousands of years. How does it do it? No pollution and circularity. Every death is renewal for the next life. Life, death, renewal, life, death, renewal, life, death, renewal. There is a model if we let nature show us the way. And this is the final slide. An ecological civilization will put ecology first. We can have a civilization designed to last thousands of years if we work with nature rather than against her. So that's the end of my presentation.
That's great, Ed. Thank you. What else do you want to talk about? You kind of summarized the fuel part a little while ago, but what else would you like to?
Well, I mean, it's just like it's the whole modality of that the political class, the activist class, is so ideologically committed to their current framework, and that they're very unwilling to listen, specifically around natural gas. Like they just are so. I don't know how. I really want to present this, and I'm hoping to get a conversation with a few people, because I'd love to see. For years, I've been hoping for the climate change community to change their tune about natural gas and recognize the importance of ecology first, really putting ecology first. That's what I'd like to see. That's where my frustration is, because I firmly believe there are solutions to be had, but not when we're not what our current leadership is saying.
Well, I've believed for some time that there's a great deal of misinformation about the relative importance of carbon dioxide. I think it has some significance, but the significance of it is overblown, and we're being fed a narrative that is a distraction from what we really need to do. we're being fed a narrative that kind of empowers centralized organizations and requires a lot of rules and regulation, and we're not really looking at the opportunities to restore ecosystems, because ecosystems absorb carbon, but also ecosystems absorb water. And you have water coursing, a functioning forest, you have water coursing through it. If you took away the trees but left the water that the trees contain, it would be a lot of tree-shaped columns of water. And that water keeps the temperatures from getting too hot or too cold. Because water, it has a high specific heat, so it's slow to take on heat and it's slow to release heat when it's cooling down, and that's a regulator. And also the forests provide
I'm just saying I agree with you. Yeah, it's we have to restore these hydrological cycles. Carbon dioxide is not a knob that we can turn that controls the weather. This whole narrative that every single weather event is a function of climate change, is a function of CO2, is a function of fossil fuels, is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's more than a little ridiculous. And it's definitely not a control knob. I mean, it's definitely not a control
we're
knob.
on a path. Mark Jacobson, I first became aware of his work. Mark Jacobson is a modeler, a Stanford professor who has modeled a so-called solution to climate change, but Ed and I both don't put much stock in his work.
I call it fraud, like capital F fraud.
Right. So I forgot what I was going to say about him, except to say that, he thinks everything can be converted to wind and solar and hydro. And what I was going to say about him is I first read about Mark Jacobson when about 5 years ago, when I was reading through the Green Party's Green New Deal on my radio show, and Mark Jacobson's work shows up, and there's like 6 or 7 different versions of a Green New Deal. There's Green Party, there's AOC, there's Bernie, there's Democratic Socialists of America. And all of them show the fingerprints of Mark Jacobson saying, a Stanford professor says, blah, 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 we can do this. And there's also these local clean and renewable energy resolutions. Louisville has one. I spent an hour of programming on Des Moines, Iowa, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Durham, North Carolina, reading through these things. And Mark Jacobson's, even if he's not named by name, his fingerprints are all over this stuff. But it really ignores, it's not practical. It ignores the ecological devastation that goes along with the mining and the transport and the smelting and the installation that is required for solar and wind. But it supports a political agenda, it supports a worldview, and it supports corporate profits. So it's hard to battle with all 3 of those things at once.
I actually have a blog post that is now coming on 10 years old on my old blog, where I did a critique of Jacobson's analysis for New York State back in 2014. You can see it on my old blog. And I know he saw it because he made some adjustments to his model after my critique came out, because he had some utterly ridiculous 100 megawatt solar. He said you could build multiple 100 megawatt solar thermal plants in upstate New York, the kind that they build out in the desert, out in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Solar thermal, not solar photovoltaic. We're talking where it's heat,
Yeah.
In upstate New York, which has like long, cold winters. And these things need to be built on like big flat ground where it's like a square mile of flat ground. There's no terrain like that in upstate New York. It's all rolling hillsides. So rolling hillsides with a long, cold, dark winter is not a place where you build 100 megawatts, which would literally be a square mile of land. And he wanted to build like so many of them all across upstate New York. It was totally absurd. And so I critiqued that. And he changed his model, but he never acknowledged me, and he blocked me on Twitter, because he blocked everybody on Twitter that he disagrees with him. And he never credited it, but he changed it in his models later on. Without retracting the first one, just in later models, he changed it.
According to Max Blumenthal, and I looked this up and verified it. Max Blumenthal is a great journalist, and he looked into Mark Jacobson and saw that Jacobson had been critiqued. This was in I think the PNAS, Proceedings of the National
I talked
Academy of
about this in the
Sciences.
footnotes of my
It
article.
was so Jacobson's colleagues critiqued his work. Jacobson sues them, and as a result of that lawsuit, it's called a SLAP, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, which is not a good thing to do. And Jacobson had ended up having to pay some of the legal fees of the people that had sued him. So, hardly scientific rigor and objectivity there.
I linked to that exact case in the footnotes of my article. I talk all about it. And I discuss it. Yeah. So they totally critiqued him. They totally took him down. And so then he sued them, which is like not what you normally do in science. And then basically what happened was he knew he was going to lose. So then the night before he was going to go to court, he withdrew the lawsuit at the last minute. And then they wanted his legal fees. They wanted him to pay his legal fees because like that's what you do when you lose a lawsuit. So then he like sued Stanford to get them to cover all the legal fees. And then so finally he suckered Stanford into covering all the legal fees and declared this big victory that he won. That
and this guy, his work is all over. His work has been completely embraced by what Derek Jensen calls the bright greens, as in Bright Green Lies. His book.
Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the people that I know locally, they're just not questioning any of this stuff. They're completely
and the thing is,
buying into it.
People have been debunking this guy for a decade. I was not the first guy to debunk him. There was a whole circle of people that were debunking him back then. And as soon as he came on the deck, as soon as he came to prominence, people were debunking him. So like, and the fact that he's still taken seriously, it really does speak to how rotten our modern day intelligentsia has gotten. It's just the tip of the iceberg that they're doing now with the plagiarism. It's another big scandal. I don't need to digress, but it's the Pretendians. If you go look up the Pretendians, all these various folks in Native American departments and chairing various Native American departments who are claiming Native American heritage are in fact totally frauds. Like Buffy St. Marie just got exposed, the musician just got exposed for pretending to be an Indian. It's all over academia. It's ripe in academia. So that's going to get exposed at some point. The renewable energy stuff is the guys who know what they're doing, guys like Jesse Jenkins, he's careful and when you really get him down to his technical work, he's always accurate. But some of these guys he's one of the few guys that I would say is like not bullshitting. It's like Amory Lovins, the Rocky Mountain Institute. That's another one where he built a whole career claiming that energy efficiency would lower our energy use. And that is a total lie. This is another one of the big lies, the whole renewable energy thing.
So let me take a crack at that. Let me take a crack at why that's true. Jevons paradox. Okay. Yada, yada, yada. Jevons apparently kind of illustrated it back in the day when there was a transition from what coal to.
No, it was early coal industry.
Early coal. But the transition. So what did Jevons talk about?
All right. So Jevons is like late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, and someplace in England, and they've got like 4 like filthy, dirty coal factories choking on inefficiently burning all their coal. So Jevon and his buddies are like, you know what? We could really save a lot of coal if we got these, boilers, more optimized and stuff. And so they, go through the exercise and they optimize the factories. And 10 years later, guess what happened? They're burning twice as much fuel than they were before. Why? Because the factories were so nice that they went from having 4 dirty factories to 10 better factories. And so they were just burning more fuel than ever. And we see the same thing and so basically the idea is every time you make a machine more efficient, you make that machine more desirable to use and you simply use it more. And so we've been doing mile per gallon fuel efficiency standards in our cars since the 70s and 80s, right? and the idea is we're supposed to reduce our energy use, right? It came out of the oil embargo. Have we actually reduced our gasoline consumption in the United States at all? Does anyone suggest we're using less gasoline and diesel than we did before? No, we just use more, because just think about it. You got 2 cars in your garage, one that gets 1 mile to the gallon and one that gets 100 miles to the gallon. Which one are you going to drive? The one that gets 100 miles to the gallon, obviously. And you're going to be like, this car's awesome. I'm going to drive to California. I'm going to make a business, delivering newspapers.
Think in terms of like, let's say we make homes more efficient to heat, which we have done. And my understanding is that as homes have become more efficient to heat, we've grown homes, like mansions and stuff like that. So that's one effect of it. But think about it on a little bit more theoretical level. When you save money on something, when you save fuel on something, that frees up money, whether it's a consumer or whether it's a business, it doesn't matter. It frees up money to spend elsewhere in this economy. And in this economy, dollars and fossil fuels are perfectly correlated. Dollars and energy are perfectly correlated. So
the number one thing people do is reinvest in their own business.
Spend it again, you're spending it back into the fossil fuel economy.
Well, look, they just reinvest in their own business to make the machines bigger. So the flip side of efficiency is making the machines bigger. So what's the most fuel efficient machine on the planet? Do you know?
No.
What class of machine is the most fuel efficient machine on the planet?
I have no idea.
It's maritime shipping, by far, by like a country mile. And how do they make them? And they're making them more efficient every single year. They're breaking records every single year.
And they're making them bigger.
They're making them bigger every single year. They are breaking records for the biggest cargo ships ever built. Prelude's still the biggest one. Well, Prelude, kind of its own category. Nonetheless, they're making those cargo ships bigger and bigger every single year. And the number one cost driver is fuel efficiency. The number one cost when you own those ships after building the ship itself is the fuel to run it. They purchase thousands of tons. They buy their fuel by the ton. And they'll buy 100 tons at a time, 1,000 tons at a time, and run that ship. It's going to go out in the ocean for 3 or 4 months before it refuels, carrying, those enormous loads. They just make them bigger. Freight trains, you just make them longer, make the engines more powerful. That's how you make them more efficient. You make them bigger. The other one's going to be LED lighting. They claim LED lighting we're going to reduce. No way. LED lighting is so awesome. I've got it everywhere. We got screens everywhere. We're going to turn all our billboards from paper billboards into like illuminated screens that get your attention. I got colored lights all over my house. I think they're great. I'm pretty sure I'm not using less electricity because of all these fun LEDs I'm adding. So we got to just, I don't know. We need some first principles. And for me, first principles got to be ecology. Everything's got to follow from that. But our current leadership doesn't do that.
Sounds like a great place to end it. Did you have anything else to say?
No, I think it's a good spot to end it too.
Okay. Well, Ed Dodge, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have to do this again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Hart. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And love and peace to the audience.